Hello and welcome to my world and a casual review. This week we're talking about Resident Evil HD, which I played back in late October and early November of 2023. Now, full disclaimer, the version of this game that I played was the Xbox One version. I put it on the easiest possible difficulty, the take a walk in the park selection of a little questionnaire that you're asked at the very beginning of the game. I also used a guide that it was available on IGN because you can't spell ignorant without IGN, and I'm about as ignorant as it comes, folks. Anyway, anyway, all that said, we also played as Jill instead of Chris because one of my biggest problems with the very early games in the Resident Evil franchise, I'm talking Resident Evil's Director's Cut, Resident Evil 2, and Resident Evil Code Veronica, or Code Veronica X, the version that I played many years ago. And my biggest problem it was always been the camera angles and whenever you have enemies or something coming towards you from off camera and not being able to see, react, or get your weapons up in time, and knowing in advance that there were more surprises, even on the easiest possible difficulty, with that cuts down on some of the enemies, in or particularly in Jill's campaign. I knew combat and aiming was going to be a problem. As a matter of fact, I probably ended up shooting the wall, ground, and ceiling more often than I hit any of the enemies I came across. Granted, I only died one time during the playthrough, and it was because I got myself crushed in the room with the closing walls and the statue in the statue. So yeah, there was that was my one death, but still, combat was always a major concern for me, particularly with the dogs and the zombies and the Crimson Heads. The hunters and the Chimera were little less troublesome for me because using a guide, I meant, oh, have your shotgun ready, have a grenade launcher ready, and you can just shoot forward, and it hits them for the most part. So it's like, yes. So again, so the combat was for me is like the biggest trouble I have with it. Obviously, the other big thing with the older Resident Evil games, actually a staple of them, is the very limited inventory space which of course was something that became a feature that Iceman and I talked about during our playthroughs, my first playthroughs ever of Resident Evil 5 and 6 earlier in 2023. So going back to an older game where you're solo and having to manage the inventory with one of the again most cryptic guides I could possibly have found for this one playthrough is like was an experience in and of itself with how much backtracking I often had to do to make sure I had ammo, make sure I had health items, make sure I had space in the inventory to pick up key items, or again back and forth to these save rooms and everything of that nature. Visually, does Resident Evil HD hold up? That's kind of debatable at this point because of the very washed out colors. Um, and I'm not sure what it is. If because I've never played the GameCube version of it, and I have to see footage of it to see if it was brighter or had a little bit more vibrant colors than this. But I kind of feel the washed out colors. Granted, it gave it more of a spooky atmosphere, but at the same time, it wasn't very compelling to look at. Again, when you look at the original Resident Evil, you had Jill in the bright blue beret and vest and tactical colors. Chris with that bright green combat vest. Same thing with Barry being bright red. Wesker having like a dark purplish shirt with a black top. It's like you kind of appreciate those older, more vibrant colors when everything is all washed out here for the sake of atmosphere. I really think having an option to adjust the color settings to make them more vibrant actually would make this game a lot more appealing. Uh, but again, I understand why they did it, and again, I don't know what the limitations were with the GameCube and why the colors weren't as vibrant for the later re-releases. I think maybe on the PC side they could be modded to have bigger and bolder colors, but hey, you get what you got with a game like this. But the character models and everything, Jill's character model still holds up, as does Wesker, as does Barry, as does the various zombies, the tyrant. It's like all the character models still hold up. Granted, by today's standards, here in 2024, by the time you guys are seeing this video, Resident Evil HD basically looks like a budget title by today's standards, but again, if you're looking at the context from when the game was originally released and the fact that it got re-released to where you can still play it on modern consoles, means that there was something special with it. And again, a lot of the character models and everything still holds up as far as I'm concerned. The charm of the voice acting from the original release, the original version, director's cut, to the HD remaster, okay, you kind of get a little bit of a trade-off there because Capcom made it a little, took out a lot of the campiness of some of the older of the original version of the game, which to me is like a bit of a detriment to the HD remaster. There is a charm to the older games, but then again, Resident Evil, at least for me, is best when it's campy and over the top, which is why when I played Resident Evil 5 and more so Resident Evil 6, I was having a freaking ball with how over the top everything was. It's like, yeah, this is, for me, that's Resident Evil. That is like the epitome of from where it started and where it went to up to that point. That's where it's like, yeah, that's exactly how it's supposed to be, because how even this game ends. It ends with a freaking big explosion. All right, technically the first big explosion in the franchise, and you can't tell me big explosions isn't a trademark of the Resident Evil games, because guess what? Resident 2 ends in one. Resident Evil 3, Resident Evil 3 ends with all of Raccoon City being nuked. Okay, so you can't tell me over the top explosions is not a part of the franchise when it's been there since the very beginning, well, or close to the very beginning. All right. So big question is this here: would I personally play Resident Evil HD ever again? If I wanted to, it would be to do Chris's campaign, get additional achievements that way, but that's very unlikely for me at this point. I kind of always looked at Resident Evil Director's Cut, Resident Evil HD after playing it as games you definitely want to play through at least once, either as Chris or as Jill. Get the experience of it, go through it, get the story. It's kind of like for me, it's like a one and done. I'm sure you have like multiple things that can be unlocked, multiple endings, costumes, things of that sort, but it's like I'm content with my one playthrough. But if I was to play through it again, it would be to do Chris's side or Chris's version of events, because the one thing you don't get with Jill's side of the campaign, you don't get Rebecca Chambers, who, for me, which actually throws in a bit of a continuity issue when you consider the events of Resident Evil 0. Although, unless you count it, if you're looking at it from Joe's point of view, Rebecca, she doesn't quite make it to the mansion by the time between the events following Resident Evil Zero, and just gets the hell out of Dodge. She gets within range just as the mansion is exploding. if one wants to try and line up events that way, but your mileage may vary with that particular theory and line of thinking with the very, very loose and peculiar canon that the Resident Evil franchise has. But so I would say recommended. I stand by the fact that everybody should play it at least once, just to get the experience of it. So it's like, again, I'm glad I played. I had fun with it, and again, even with all the conditions that I played it under. So with that said, if you have your thoughts on it, or if you want to see actually, if you want to see my playthrough of it, all the videos are on the Resident Evil playlist, along with Resident Evil, my playthroughs of Resident Evil 5 and Resident Evil 6. So they're all there here on the YouTube channel. So with that said, leave your comments on Resident Evil HD in the comment section below. Tighten your friendship bracelet. Stay safe. Like and subscribe if you're so inclined. And we'll see y'all in the next video. Bye.